What happens when Hollywood's biggest star loses his cool on live television? In just 24 seconds, a friendly chat turned into an explosive showdown that nobody saw coming. Before we dive into this shocking confrontation, make sure you subscribe to our channel. We bring you daily videos exposing Hollywood's darkest scandals, the moments celebrities don't want you to see, and the drama that unfolds when the cameras are rolling. Last night on Lorraine Kelly's show, what started as a simple conversation about Brad Pitt's latest movie quickly spiraled into one of the most intense confrontations in talk show history. The tension was thick from the moment Brad walked onto that stage, and within minutes, the entire studio would witness a meltdown that left everyone speechless. Lorraine welcomed Brad with her signature warm smile, gesturing to the couch beside her. The audience applauded as he walked over, but even they seemed to sense something was different. Brad sat down, adjusting his jacket, his jaw already set tight. You could see it in his eyes. Something was off. There was a hardness there, a distance that hadn't been present in his previous talk show appearances. Lorraine didn't seem to notice, or maybe she was choosing to ignore it. She launched straight into her first question about his new film, her voice bright and enthusiastic. She asked about his experience working with the director, whether they'd developed a strong creative partnership during filming. Brad answered briefly, his responses clipped and short. "Fine," he said. It was fine. One-word answers. No elaboration. No follow-up. Nothing. Lorraine tried to keep things light, laughing off the awkwardness. But you could hear the confusion creeping into her voice. This wasn't how these things usually went. Guests were supposed to open up, share stories, create those memorable moments. She pivoted, asking about his preparation for the role, how he got into character, what research he'd done. Surely this would get him talking. Actors love discussing their process, their method, their approach to becoming someone else. Brad shifted in his seat, his expression unchanging. He said he did what he always did, learned the lines, showed up, did the work. That's when Brad leaned forward slightly. His voice dropped lower, taking on an edge that made everyone in the studio sit up a little straighter. He said he didn't really want to talk about the movie. He wanted to talk about something else. Something more important. Something that actually mattered. Lorraine blinked, caught off guard. Her smile faltered for just a second before she recovered. She asked what he meant, keeping her professional composure, but you could see her glancing toward her producer off stage. A silent question passed between them. What was happening here? What had they walked into? Brad leaned back, spreading his arms across the back of the couch. He said he was tired. So damn tired. Tired of the same questions, asked in slightly different ways. Interview after interview, show after show. Tired of pretending everything was perfect, that Hollywood was this magical dream factory, when there were real issues that needed discussing. Real problems that nobody wanted to address because it might make things uncomfortable. The studio went quiet. Even the audience seemed to hold their breath. Lorraine tried to steer things back, her voice taking on that soothing, professional tone she'd perfected over years of broadcasting. She reminded Brad that they'd agreed to discuss his film. That's why he was here. That's what her viewers were expecting. His publicist had confirmed the talking points just yesterday. They had a plan. Brad shook his head, a bitter laugh escaping his lips. The sound was harsh in the quiet studio. He said he knew what they'd agreed on. He knew exactly what was in that nice little packet his team had prepared, full of safe questions and approved answers. But plans change, don't they? Things change. People change. Maybe he was tired of being the person everyone expected him to be. Lorraine maintained her smile, but it was strained now. The muscles in her face were working overtime to keep up the appearance of calm. She suggested they take a quick break, maybe regroup, have a chat off camera. These things happen sometimes. Guests got nervous, felt overwhelmed. A few minutes off camera could reset everything, get them back on track. Brad said no. The word came out flat and final. No breaks, no regrouping, no resetting. He was here now, sitting on this couch, under these lights, in front of these people. If she wanted to have a real conversation, an actual honest discussion about something that mattered, they could have one. Otherwise, what was the point of any of this? What was the point of him sitting here, answering questions he'd answered 100 times before, pretending to be excited about things that didn't excite him anymore. The audience shifted uncomfortably in their seats. This wasn't what they'd signed up for. They'd come for entertainment, for celebrity charm, for those carefully crafted anecdotes that made them feel connected to someone famous. Not this. Not whatever this was turning into. Lorraine's producer was now visible at the edge of the stage, making cutting motions with his hand, his face tight with stress. "End this," his gestures said. "Wrap it up, move on." Lorraine ignored him. Something in her expression changed. The professional mask was still there, but underneath it, you could see steel forming. She leaned back in her chair, crossing her legs, her body language shifting from welcoming to defensive. She asked Brad what exactly he wanted to talk about then, if not his movie. What was so important that he needed to derail the entire interview? What issue was worth disrupting a show that millions of people watched? Brad started talking about the industry. His voice rose, gaining momentum as he went. He talked about how talk shows manufacture these perfect little moments, these carefully curated exchanges that bore no resemblance to real conversation. How guests are coached beforehand, told what topics are off limits, given lists of acceptable anecdotes. How the whole thing is choreographed, scripted, controlled from start to finish. Smile at the right times, laugh at the right jokes, make everything seem wonderful when it's all just a performance. Another performance on top of all the other performances they were already giving. His voice rose with each word, frustration bleeding through every syllable. You could see veins standing out on his neck, his hands gesturing more wildly as he spoke. This wasn't careful celebrity media training. This was something raw, something that had clearly been building for a while, and now it was all coming out. Lorraine's expression hardened. The friendly television presenter was gone now, replaced by someone who'd been in this business long enough to know when someone was attacking her directly. She said that was quite an accusation to make, sitting on her show, in front of her audience, using her platform. She'd been doing this for years, decades even. Her show was built on genuine conversations, on real connections with people. She gave guests a space to be themselves, to share their stories, to connect with viewers who admired their work. Brad scoffed. The sound was dismissive, almost mocking. Genuine? He asked if she was actually serious right now. He said every single question had been vetted 3 days ago. His publicist had gone through them line by line, approving some, rejecting others, suggesting alternatives for ones they didn't like. Every answer was expected, anticipated, planned for. And if someone stepped out of line, if someone said something unexpected or uncomfortable, they got pulled back into place. Either by the host, changing the subject, or by their own team after the interview, doing damage control, issuing clarifications. It was all controlled, all sanitized, all fake. The temperature in the studio was rising. You could feel it, this shift in the air, like pressure building before a storm breaks. Lorraine set down her cards, the notes she'd prepared for the interview. Her professional demeanor was cracking now, pieces of it falling away to reveal genuine anger underneath. She told Brad that if he had such a problem with talk shows, with her show specifically, with the entire format and everything it represented, then perhaps he shouldn't have agreed to come on in the first place. Nobody forced him to be here. Nobody dragged him onto that stage. He could have said no. His people could have declined the invitation, but they didn't. He was here by choice. Brad stood up abruptly. The movement so sudden it startled everyone in the vicinity. The cameraman closest to him actually took a step back, his lens wobbling slightly. Brad's hands were clenched at his sides, his whole body radiating tension. He said that was exactly his point. That right there. He came on because his publicist told him to. His agent said it would be good for the film. His studio said it was part of his contractual obligations. Because that's how the game works. You don't get to just make movies and disappear. You have to play the game. You have to do the press tour, sit on the couches, answer the questions, sell the product. But he was done playing. He was done with the fake smiles and the rehearsed anecdotes and pretending like any of this meant anything. Lorraine stood up too, rising from her chair with deliberate slowness. Her arms crossed over her chest, her posture defensive but also challenging. She said that was fine. That was absolutely fine. He was entitled to his feelings, his opinions, his frustrations, with an industry he'd willingly been part of for decades. But he didn't have to come here and insult her. He didn't have to attack her team. The crew who'd been here since 5 in the morning, setting up lights and cameras. The researchers who'd spent hours preparing those questions he was dismissing so casually. He didn't have to belittle everything they'd built, everything they worked for. If he wanted to leave, if he was so uncomfortable, so opposed to this entire format, the door was right there. Nobody was stopping him. Brad laughed again, but there was no humor in it. The sound was bitter, almost painful to hear. He said that was typical. So typical. Shutting down anyone who dared to speak honestly, who dared to question the system, who dared to suggest that maybe, just maybe, things could be different. Turn it into a personal attack. Make it about him being difficult, being unprofessional, being ungrateful for the opportunity. That was always how it went, wasn't it? Stay in line or get cut off. He started pacing now, unable to stand still anymore. His hands were gesturing wildly, punctuating every sentence with sharp movements. He said he'd been in this industry for decades. 30+ years of interviews, of press tours, of saying the right things at the right times. And he was tired, bone tired. Tired of everyone pretending like it wasn't all smoke and mirrors. Tired of the illusion that any of this was real or meaningful or anything other than a carefully constructed performance designed to separate people from their money. Lorraine's face flushed red, the color rising from her neck to her cheeks. Her Scottish accent grew thicker with her anger, each word pointed and direct. She told Brad he was being incredibly disrespectful. Not just to her, but to everyone who worked hard to make this show happen. To the audience members who'd taken time out of their day to be here. To the viewers at home who'd tuned in expecting something enjoyable, something entertaining. She said if he had grievances about Hollywood, about the entertainment industry, about how things worked, that was one thing. Those were valid conversations to have. But he didn't get to come on her show and throw a tantrum like a spoiled child who wasn't getting his way. That word, child. It hung in the air like a slap. Brad stopped pacing immediately, freezing mid-step. He turned to face her fully, his eyes narrowing. The entire energy in the room shifted again, becoming even more charged, more dangerous. He asked her what she just called him. His voice was dangerously quiet now, which somehow felt more threatening than when he'd been shouting. Lorraine didn't back down. She could have. She could have softened it, apologized for the word choice, tried to de-escalate, but she didn't. She repeated it. She said he was acting like a child. A petulant, difficult child who was unable to handle a simple interview without creating unnecessary drama. She said adults had difficult conversations all the time without resorting to theatrics, without attacking people who were just trying to do their jobs. The studio was dead silent now. Even the crew had stopped moving. Camera operators stood frozen. Boom mic operators held their positions. Production assistants stood still at the edges of the stage. Everyone was watching, unable to look away from the train wreck unfolding before them. Brad took a step closer to Lorraine's desk. Not threatening, exactly, but definitely invading the space that had separated them. He said she had no idea what she was talking about. No clue whatsoever. She didn't know what it was like to live under constant scrutiny, to have every word twisted and analyzed and dissected, to have every action photographed and judged, to have strangers feel entitled to pieces of you, to your time, to your story, simply because you appeared in movies. She lived in her comfortable little bubble, asking her comfortable little questions, never having to expose anything real about herself, while demanding vulnerability from everyone who sat on that couch. Lorraine's eyes flashed with something fierce. She said, "Comfortable bubble?" Her voice rose to match his now, all pretense of television politeness completely abandoned. She'd been in this industry just as long as he had. Longer, actually, if you counted her early days in radio and regional television. She'd worked just as hard, clawed her way up from nothing, faced her own share of criticism and challenges. She dealt with sexism, with ageism, with people constantly questioning whether she deserved her position. She'd handled personal tragedies in the public eye, dealt with tabloid stories about her life, her family, her choices, and she handled it with grace, with professionalism, with dignity. Not by lashing out at people who were trying to support her, trying to give her a platform, trying to help her succeed. She took a breath, her chest heaving with the force of her emotions. She said she didn't need him lecturing her about scrutiny. She knew all about it. But the difference between them, the fundamental difference, was that she understood the contract they'd all signed when they entered public life. She understood that being in the public eye came with responsibilities, with expectations. And part of that was showing up, doing the work, treating people with respect, even when it was difficult, even when you were tired, even when you didn't feel like it. Brad's jaw clenched. He said, "Grace? This wasn't grace. This was control. This was making sure everyone stayed in their designated boxes, said their designated lines." He said she was part of the problem, keeping the machine running smoothly while real issues got ignored. Lorraine took a step toward him now, her finger pointed at his chest. She told him he didn't get to come here and make her the villain because he was having a bad day. She said her show provided a platform for meaningful conversations, for showcasing talent, for connecting with audiences in a genuine way. If he couldn't see that, if he couldn't participate in that, then he needed to leave. Brad's face twisted with anger. He said, "Meaningful conversations? Everything here was scripted, controlled, sanitized." He said he'd rather have an honest argument, right here, right now, than another fake friendly chat that meant nothing. At least this was real. At least people were finally seeing something true. Lorraine's voice rose to match his. She said this wasn't real. This was him being difficult for the sake of being difficult. She said she'd interviewed hundreds of people, actors far more famous than him, and they managed to have perfectly lovely conversations without resorting to this nonsense. She said he was the common denominator here, not her show. Brad threw his hands up. He said, "Lovely conversations." There it was again. Everything had to be lovely. Everything had to be polite. God forbid anyone actually said what they were thinking. He said the whole system was broken, and everyone was too scared to admit it because they might lose their precious access. Lorraine's producer was now on stage, trying to intervene, but Lorraine waved him off. She told Brad that access, as he called it, was earned through mutual respect, through professionalism. She said he was throwing away his credibility, his reputation, over what? Some manufactured rebellion against the very industry that made him who he is? Brad's laugh was harsh. He said, "Manufactured?" This was the most unmanufactured moment he'd had in years. This was actually saying what he thought, instead of reading from an approved script. He said she could call it whatever she wanted, but at least it was honest. Lorraine shook her head slowly. She said honesty without respect was just cruelty. She said she tried to give him a platform to share his work, to connect with people who admired him, and this was how he repaid that courtesy. She said she was done. She was actually done. She turned to her producer, speaking loudly enough for everyone to hear. She said they were cutting this segment, that Brad could leave now. The interview was over. She wasn't going to stand there and be berated on her own show. Brad's expression shifted, surprise flickering across his face for just a moment before the anger returned. He said fine. He was happy to leave. He said this whole thing was a waste of his time anyway. He started unhooking his microphone, fumbling with the wire in his frustration. Lorraine crossed her arms, watching him coldly. She said she hoped this outburst was worth it, whatever he thought he was proving. She said her viewers deserved better than this circus, and frankly, so did she. Brad yanked the microphone off, the wire snapping. He tossed it onto the chair behind him. He said her viewers deserved the truth, not the carefully packaged crap they usually got. He said maybe this would wake people up, make them question what they were actually watching. Lorraine's voice was ice now. She told him to get off her stage. Just get out. She'd given him every opportunity to have a civil conversation, and he'd chosen this path. She said the door was right there, and she'd appreciate it if he used it immediately. Brad stared at her for a long moment, his chest heaving. The entire studio held its breath. Then he turned sharply, his footsteps heavy as he walked toward the exit. He didn't look back, didn't say another word. He just walked, his shoulders tight, with barely contained rage. Lorraine remained standing, her arms still crossed, watching him go. Her face was flushed, her breathing uneven, but she didn't move. The audience sat frozen, unsure if they should react, unsure what they'd just witnessed. As Brad reached the edge of the stage, one of the production assistants stepped forward. perhaps to escort him out properly. Brad brushed past without acknowledging them, pushing through the heavy studio door. The sound of it slamming echoed through the silent space. For several seconds, nobody moved. Lorraine finally turned back to face the audience, her professional mask attempting to slide back into place. But the cracks were visible. Her hands were shaking slightly as she smoothed down her dress. The studio light seemed harsher now. The atmosphere completely changed from the warm, inviting space it had been just minutes before. The cameras were still rolling, capturing every moment of the aftermath. The stunned faces of the crew, the uncomfortable shifting of the audience. Lorraine opened her mouth as if to address everyone, to say something that might salvage the situation. But no words came out. She closed her mouth again, pressing her lips together tightly. Her producer rushed over, speaking in hushed, urgent tones, but she wasn't really listening. She was staring at the door Brad had just exited through, the echo of the confrontation still hanging in the air. The audience finally began to react, a low murmur spreading through the seats. Some people looked shocked, others confused. A few even appeared excited by the drama they'd just witnessed. But the comfortable, safe atmosphere that Lorraine's show was known for had been completely shattered. Lorraine's hands gripped the edge of her desk, her knuckles white. She'd conducted thousands of interviews, navigated difficult guests, handled awkward moments with grace and humor. But this was different. This had been a direct attack, a challenge to everything her show represented, and it had spiraled completely out of control. The production assistant who tried to help Brad was now returning to the stage, shaking her head at the producer. The message was clear. Brad was gone. Really gone. Out of the building entirely. There would be no coming back from this. No smoothing it over with a publicist's apology or a carefully worded statement. Lorraine finally seemed to register her producer's words, nodding slowly. She took a deep breath, trying to compose herself, to find that professional center she'd maintained for so many years. But the anger was still there, simmering just beneath the surface, visible in the tightness around her eyes, the set of her jaw. She looked at the audience again, really seeing them this time. These were people who'd come to see a fun, light-hearted interview with a Hollywood star. Instead, they'd gotten a front-row seat to a complete meltdown, a confrontation that had turned ugly and personal. The weight of the moment settled on everyone in that studio. This wasn't just another difficult interview or an awkward exchange that would be laughed about later. This was something that would be talked about, analyzed, debated for days, weeks, maybe longer. Lorraine straightened up slowly, releasing her grip on the desk. Her producer was still talking, probably discussing how to handle the rest of the show, whether to acknowledge what had just happened or try to move on. But Lorraine wasn't ready to move on. Not yet. She walked slowly back to her chair, each step deliberate. She sat down carefully, smoothing her dress again, a nervous habit she couldn't quite control. The studio was still quiet, everyone waiting to see what would happen next, how she would handle the aftermath. But there was no script for this, no pre-approved response. This was genuinely uncharted territory. And for someone who'd built her career on being prepared, on knowing exactly what to say and when to say it, the uncertainty was almost overwhelming. The cameras continued to roll, capturing it all. Every moment of confusion, of anger, of hurt pride. This was the reality Brad had demanded, the unscripted truth he'd claimed to want. And now, everyone had to live with it. Lorraine's producer finally stepped back, giving her space. He knew her well enough to recognize when she needed a moment to process, to gather her thoughts. The audience was getting restless now, the initial shock wearing off, replaced by curiosity and 100 questions. One thing was certain. This interview, this confrontation, would be replayed over and over. It would be the clip everyone talked about, the moment that defined this particular episode, maybe even this entire season. It was raw, it was real, and it was completely unforgettable. Lorraine looked directly at the camera, her expression complex, a mixture of emotions playing across her face. Anger, certainly. Frustration. But also something else. Maybe disappointment. Maybe hurt. It was hard to tell. The door Brad had slammed remained closed, a physical barrier now between what had happened and what came next. He was gone, out into the London streets, away from the cameras and the confrontation, leaving behind a studio full of people trying to make sense of what they just witnessed. and Lorraine, sitting in her chair on her own show, was left to pick up the pieces of an interview that had imploded in the most spectacular way possible. The comfortable, controlled world she'd carefully built had been disrupted, challenged, broken apart right there on live television. The silence stretched on, becoming almost unbearable. Someone in the audience coughed. A camera operator shifted position. These small sounds seemed amplified in the tense atmosphere, highlighting just how far things had fallen from the cheerful beginning Lorraine had envisioned. This was supposed to be a routine segment, a chance to discuss a new film, to share some laughs, maybe some behind-the-scenes stories. Instead, it had become a battleground, a clash of perspectives and personalities that neither party had been willing to back down from. Lorraine's fingers drummed once against the armrest of her chair before she caught herself and stopped. She was still processing, still trying to understand how it had escalated so quickly, how a simple interview had transformed into such a heated confrontation. Brad's accusations still hung in the air, his words about manufactured moments and controlled narratives. Whether or not he had a point, the way he delivered his message had been aggressive, confrontational, designed to provoke rather than discuss. And provoke it had. Lorraine had matched his energy, refusing to be pushed around on her own show, standing her ground even as things got increasingly hostile. She'd defended herself, her team, her work, unwilling to let his criticisms go unanswered. But at what cost? The interview was ruined. The promotional opportunity for his film was gone. The goodwill between them, if there ever was any, had been completely destroyed. And all of it had played out in front of cameras, in front of an audience, for everyone to see. The producer made another approach, this time more insistent. They needed to make a decision about how to proceed. The show couldn't just stop, couldn't just freeze in this moment of chaos. They had to move forward somehow. Lorraine nodded slowly, finally acknowledging him. She'd made her choice. She'd stood up for herself, refused to be walked over, and she'd do it again if she had to. Whatever happened next, whatever fallout came from this confrontation, she'd face it head on, because that's what she did. That's what she'd always done. She was professional, she was prepared, and she was damn good at her job. One difficult guest, one explosive argument wouldn't change that. But as she sat there, preparing to move on with the show, preparing to address her audience and salvage what remained of the episode, she couldn't quite shake the image of Brad storming off that stage, the door slamming behind him, the confrontation ending not with resolution but with a dramatic, angry exit that nobody would forget.